Do you feel as though you're living the American dream?
Oh, come on. Coming here with approximately $50 and a piano, not being able to speak the language, going through everything to get to where we are. If that's not an American dream, I don't know what is.
Eddie Van Halen isn't just a guitar legend. He's the guy who changed how we play the instrument forever. But even geniuses have opinions, and Eddie was never shy about sharing his. At 62, he opened up about the 6 guitarists who earned his respect the least, and it's not what you might expect. From live mistakes to flashy tricks that felt hollow, Eddie's critiques slice deep, revealing his obsession with originality and execution. Whether you idolize classic rock heroes or shred like a pro, these opinions give a rare peek behind the curtain, showing what really mattered to Eddie on stage and in the studio. 1. Jimmy Page, the sloppy studio wizard.
Okay, at this point... Yeah. So when the Yardbirds, the 4 Yardbirds split, and I actually tried to encourage them to keep going, but they'd been through 3 guitar changes, and Keith Relford had quite, enough really of it, and plus this crippling schedule of singles that we were doing had nothing whatsoever to do with what we were doing live.
Back in the late 70s, Eddie Van Halen was still gigging in smoky clubs around Pasadena when he got the chance to see Led Zeppelin live. He was already a huge fan, everyone was. But after the show, he wasn't impressed. In fact, he thought Jimmy Page was kind of a mess on stage. Years later, in an old Guitar World interview, Eddie didn't hold back. He said Page was great in the studio, but never played well live, that he sounded sloppy, like he had a broken hand. Harsh words, especially considering Page was one of the most influential guitarists of all time. Thing is, Eddie wasn't completely wrong. If you go back and listen to some Zeppelin bootlegs from '77, you can hear Page struggling through solos, missing notes, getting buried in feedback. He was deep in his heroin years then, and his live shows were unpredictable. Sometimes magical, sometimes a train wreck. Meanwhile, Eddie was grinding nightly in small venues where one bad show could get you replaced. For him, precision wasn't optional, it was survival. That contrast says a lot about both of them. Page came from that blues-based, improv-heavy era where rawness was part of the charm. Eddie came from a newer school that valued tight execution and innovation. He built his entire sound on control, every tap, dive, and harmonic carefully shaped. So watching Page wing it on stage probably felt reckless, maybe even disrespectful to the craft. Ironically, Page later called Eddie the real deal in 2020, long after the sting of that quote faded. And weirdly, they both represented opposite ends of rock's evolution. Page, the mystical riff architect who built atmosphere out of chaos. Eddie, the perfectionist who turned chaos into technique. 2 wizards, different spells, one messy, one meticulous, but both impossible to ignore.
I was there in the 60s, it wasn't that great. It wasn't really that great.
You're telling us now?
Yeah, it was okay, but it wasn't that good. There was actually less happening, if you can believe that. It was like the Beatles and the Stones. What else was there?
2. Eric Clapton, the blues hero turned teabag. By 1980, Van Halen was already a big deal. Eddie's flying high off Van Halen 2, and life's moving fast. Magazine covers, endless tours, fans everywhere. One night, he finally gets to meet his hero, Eric Clapton. For Eddie, this is huge. As a kid, he used to sit in his room for hours trying to learn Clapton's licks from Cream's Disraeli Gears album. Those solos on Crossroads and Sunshine of Your Love, that was his Bible. Clapton was the guy. But when they finally met backstage, it didn't go like Eddie had imagined. Clapton wasn't in his wild Cream era spirit anymore. he'd mellowed out into this more laid-back blues elder type. Eddie brought up guitar stuff, kind of expecting some mutual excitement, and Clapton basically brushed him off. Said something like, "All that fast stuff is just noise." That hit Eddie the wrong way. Here's his idol calling the very thing that made him stand out. His speed, his tapping, his experimentation, nothing more than noise. So Eddie snapped back. Later on, he started calling Clapton that teabag, which was his not-so-subtle jab at Clapton's overly polite British restraint. In interviews years later, Eddie admitted he still loved Cream, but thought Clapton completely lost his fire afterward. And honestly, he kind of had a point. Clapton went from that raw, experimental sound with Mayall and the Dominoes to more polished, pop-leaning albums in the 80s. Great musician still, but the edge was gone. Then there's this layer of creative tension between them. Clapton wasn't shy about saying he didn't get the whole shredding thing. In Musician magazine, he dismissed tapping as a gimmick, like it wasn't real music. Eddie saw that and rolled his eyes. For him, tapping wasn't showing off, it was invention, a new way of expanding what the guitar could do. The weirdest part is that both of them kind of stood for the same idea, pushing the guitar forward. But their paths split. Clapton mellowed out, and Eddie took off into the technical stratosphere. Eddie said Clapton played the same solos every night like a machine. That predictability was the exact thing he didn't want to become. So yeah, the teabag line wasn't just an insult, it was disappointment. Eddie had worshipped this guy who showed him what was possible, only to watch him settle into comfort. Maybe that's why it stung so much. It wasn't anger, really. It was that heartbreak you feel when your hero stops chasing the spark that made you love them in the first place.
What did Randy have to say?
When they told me, I thought they were joking, because Sharon always jokes with me anyway. And she called me one day and told me, and I just didn't believe it. For a week, still I didn't believe it,
3. Randy Rhoads, the copycat shredder. By the early 80s, rock was getting louder, faster, and flashier. Van Halen had already changed the whole guitar scene. Every kid wanted to sound like Eddie. Then Randy Rhoads showed up. Young, blonde, ridiculously good, and playing with Ozzy Osbourne after leaving Quiet Riot. He brought this mix of classical phrasing and heavy metal that made people stop and pay attention. Songs like Crazy Train and Mr. Crowley sounded fresh, dramatic, tight, and technical. Fans loved it. But when Eddie heard them, he wasn't impressed. He told interviewers later that he thought Randy was basically copying his stuff. The tapping, the hammer-ons, the flashy whammy dives. It all felt too close to what he'd already done on Eruption. In a 1981 interview that resurfaced years later, Eddie said something like, "He's good, but it sounds like he's just doing what I've already done." To him, it wasn't innovation, it was imitation, but the truth's a little more complicated. Randy actually admired Eddie a lot. He once said, "Eddie changed everything." He wasn't trying to steal, he was trying to keep up with the new standard Eddie had set. The guitar world was evolving fast, and every player was pulling from someone. That's how music works. But Eddie took it personally. For him, the guitar was sacred territory. If he spent years perfecting something, seeing someone else use it felt like theft, even if it wasn't meant that way. There was also a bit of ego in it, which makes sense. Eddie had revolutionized the guitar almost overnight, and suddenly, there's this kid getting headlines for doing something similar. He didn't want to share that space. At award shows, when people started mentioning Randy alongside him, he'd brush it off. "He's okay," he'd say. You could tell it bothered him. But even with the tension, there was this unspoken respect between them. They were both obsessed with the craft, always practicing, always tinkering with tone and technique. Sadly, Randy's career ended way too soon after that plane crash in 1982. He was just getting started, and who knows where he could have gone with more time. After Randy's death, Eddie's comments about him softened. He admitted later that the kid had talent, a different kind of player, he said once. Maybe he saw that they were chasing the same thing, making the guitar talk in new ways. So, yeah, Eddie might have called him a copycat, but underneath that there was something else. Maybe fear, maybe pride, maybe both. Two guys who changed rock guitar forever, circling the same sound from different angles. One kicked the door open, the other tried to walk through it. That's not stealing, that's legacy.
I think we have a lot of energy. It was very fresh. Led Zeppelin just released their first LP, which was a big hit. And that type of music was the genre of the day. In the 70s, it was Led Zeppelin, Purple, Black Sabbath.
4. Ritchie Blackmore, the arrogant gatekeeper. When Van Halen started making noise in the late 70s, not everyone was happy about it, especially not Ritchie Blackmore. At the 1978 Monsters of Rock tour, Eddie remembered getting one of those silent, icy, "you don't belong here" looks from him. Years later, he laughed about it in an interview, saying, "Ritchie hated my guts. He didn't even have to say it. I could feel it." Blackmore, the guitar genius behind Deep Purple and Rainbow, was already a legend by then. He had that classical meets rock thing nailed with his crazy fast scales, violin bow tricks, and dramatic stage presence. But he was also known for being, well, difficult, moody, territorial. He didn't like sharing the spotlight, especially with a younger player who was suddenly getting all the attention. Eddie came from the opposite mindset. He'd grown up hustling in tiny clubs, hauling gear, trying to win crowds over with pure energy. So when a big name like Blackmore treated him like an intruder instead of a peer, it stung. It wasn't about ego. Eddie just wanted mutual respect. But Ritchie wasn't the mentoring type. He kept to himself, guarded, sometimes outright cold to other musicians. People who worked those early festivals said Blackmore would cut other bands' sound checks short or refuse to share certain stage equipment. Eddie noticed that kind of behavior and decided that's not who he wanted to be. He made a point later in his career to lift other musicians up. He even helped Alan Holdsworth, a jazz fusion player he admired, get signed to Warner Brothers in the 80s. To Eddie, Blackmore's arrogance felt like a wall, the kind that kept new voices out of rock's inner circle. And it didn't have to be that way. He respected Ritchie's skill, everyone did, but the vibe just didn't match. One was obsessed with control, the other thrived on collaboration. Eddie later said he learned 2 lessons from that encounter. Never act like you're better than anyone, and never stop sharing what you know. Blackmore might have been a hero on paper, but to Eddie, that cold shoulder became a quiet motivator, a reminder to do the opposite.
And like everything, there's a balance. There's the good and the bad. So it was as bad as it could get, and it's also been as good.
5. Joe Perry, the cold shoulder rocker. That same year, another legend gave Eddie the same frosty treatment, Joe Perry from Aerosmith. Eddie was still the new kid in the big leagues, and Aerosmith were already rock royalty with hits like Walk This Way and Sweet Emotion. You'd think there'd be camaraderie among guitarists, right? Not quite. In an interview years later, Eddie said, "Joe hated my guts too. Never said a word, just stared. It wasn't an argument or an insult, just silence. The kind that hangs heavy enough to make you feel like you shouldn't be in the room." Now, to be fair, Aerosmith in the late 70s wasn't exactly stable. The band was dealing with substance abuse, internal feuds, and burnout from constant touring. Perry's attitude might have been less about Eddie personally, and more about the chaos surrounding him. Still, For a young musician who idolized the classic rock generation, getting that kind of cold shoulder wasn't easy to brush off. Eddie wasn't looking for approval, but he did want connection, a sense of shared respect among players. Instead, what he saw from guys like Perry and Blackmore was gatekeeping. It was like the older generation didn't want to hand over the torch. They saw this fast-playing, tapping, smiling kid and thought he was just flash and noise. The irony? Eddie respected Perry's raw style. He loved that Aerosmith had this loose, gritty groove that was the total opposite of Page's messy energy. But when that respect wasn't returned, he channeled it differently. Instead of closing off, he opened up, mentoring younger guitarists, producing other artists, and giving them a shot like no one gave him. He once said, "You don't learn anything from putting people down." Perry's dismissal became fuel. By the time Aerosmith hit their rough patch in the early 80s, Eddie was pushing rock forward, experimenting with synths, writing with Michael Jackson, and keeping guitar exciting. That whole brotherhood of rock Eddie hoped for didn't always show up, but he built his own version of it through kindness, collaboration, and pure playing. Perry might have turned a cold shoulder, but Eddie turned it into momentum.
Beatle haircuts. We went out, we had our gray Beatle suits on, and we go there, and at the sound check, the guys in the Strangeloves go, "Do you know that we want to sing My Girl Sloopy?" We didn't know that they're looking for people to sing this song. "Do you know this song?" We said, "We know that song. We love that song. We can't believe you guys want to do that." So we played My Girl Sloopy with them that night, and they couldn't believe it. It was the last night of their tour. They said, "Could you tell those boys to come back in our dressing?"
6. Rick Derringer, the opportunistic thief. Rick Derringer's name doesn't come up often in Eddie's interviews, but when it did, there was always a hint of frustration. Derringer had been around since the 60s, a solid player who scored hits like Rock and Roll, Hoochie Coo, and played with the Edgar Winter Group. But by the late 70s, Eddie started noticing something odd, riffs in Derringer's songs that sounded uncomfortably familiar. In one interview around 1982, Eddie mentioned hearing one of Derringer's newer tracks and thinking, "Man, that sounds a lot like Ain't Talking About Love." He wasn't amused. To him, it wasn't about ego, it was about originality. Eddie always believed that real players created their own voice, their own fingerprint. If you had to borrow someone else's sound, you weren't doing the work. Derringer brushed it off as a coincidence, but Eddie wasn't buying it. By then, Van Halen's sound was everywhere. Every bar band was trying to copy his tone, his phrasing, his tapping. So maybe Derringer wasn't stealing on purpose, but Eddie had developed radar for that kind of thing. He'd worked too hard to invent something new to watch others coast on it. Still, the Derringer thing wasn't personal. Eddie didn't go after him or make it a public feud. He just saw it as another example of how quickly originality gets diluted once it hits the mainstream. That's why he kept pushing forward, refusing to repeat himself. While others were recycling riffs, Eddie was in the studio tweaking gear, building new effects, and creating tones no one had ever heard. His collaborations, like the one with Michael Jackson on Beat It, proved that innovation always wins out over imitation. To Eddie, Derringer's copying wasn't just about music, it was about attitude. You either led with creativity or you got left behind. And in his world, playing it safe was the biggest sin of all. And that's a wrap on the 6 guitarists Eddie Van Halen openly disliked. A peek into the mind of a legend who valued originality and flawless execution above all else. Whether you agree with his takes or not, it's a reminder that even the greatest have strong opinions about craft. If you love diving into Eddie's candid thoughts, hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives into rock history, and drop a comment telling us, which of these guitarists do you secretly agree with or disagree with? We want to hear your takes.